Good morning, everybody. It's 8:30, and it's a delight to open the 20th IISS Shangri-La Dialogue. I would like to thank Acting Prime Minister Lawrence Wong for having hosted us last night for the opening keynote address of this 20th anniversary dialogue that was delivered by Prime Minister Albanese. And I'm delighted again to say how many delegations are here this year and how many are led by their defense minister. In a moment, we'll begin the first plenary session on the United States' leadership in the Indo-Pacific. But before that, I need to remind everybody here that all the speeches delivered here from the plenary and all the answers given to questions are on the record. It's equally the case that all the questions asked are on the record, so assume a certain responsibility for your own reputation as you ask that question, because it might be cited in public as well when people hear it and react to it. If you do want to ask a question or make a comment, please make it crisp. In my experience, a short question and a crisp comment will inspire a more interesting answer. And if you wish to take the floor, you will all notice that all 575 people in this room have a microphone set in front of them. You all have a badge. There are two things that you need to do if you would like to ask a question. The first is place your badge into the slot on the right-hand side of the microphone set. And the second, turn on your microphone. It will then turn green and your name will appear on my list here. And I might choose you then to make a crisp comment or ask a precise question. I will know where you're sitting because I have a map here. And I already see that 4 or 5 experienced delegates at the Shangri-La Dialogue have already sought the floor. It is likely that by the time the Secretary of Defense completes his remarks, I will see 40 or 50 green dots here, and you will understand my need to choose in a diverse way the variety of participants who might be able to seek the floor. But I'm glad that that tradecraft has been learned by the experienced delegates here, and I hope, given that it's only a 2-step process, that it shouldn't defeat the intellect of all of those of you who are gathered here. Be reassured that while your microphone will turn green, it is not on. It is not a hot mic. It's only when I press the right button here that it will turn red, at which point it does become a hot mic, but I retain the sovereign authority to turn it off if I believe that you are not following my initial direction to be crisp and short. So there we are for housekeeping remarks. And now that it is approaching 8:35, it's possible for me to introduce our opening speaker. And while it sounds like a mere courtesy, it's true from the bottom of my heart to say that it's again a real delight to have Lloyd Austin sitting beside me here on stage at the Shangri-La Dialogue. He and I were speaking on the way here about the intensity of travel that defense ministers and defense secretaries around the world must engage in. He's been in Japan. He has a couple of other trips to do, but we're delighted that he's here honoring the Shangri-La Dialogue with his presence and ready to address us on a topic that is on everybody's minds, which is the United States strategic situation in the Indo-Pacific region. Mr. Secretary, that podium is yours. Thank you very much again for being with us.
Well, good morning, everyone. It is indeed great to be back here for another Shangri-La Dialogue. Let me thank John and everyone at IISS for their efforts to deepen our dialogue on the Indo-Pacific. You know, this is my third time speaking in Singapore at a IISS event. And so this is starting to be, it's just becoming a habit there, John. So I also want to thank our national host, Singapore, for your tremendous hospitality. It's great to see Senior Minister Teo and Minister Ng and other distinguished guests from our host here today. And I'm glad that we're joined by so many defense ministers and leaders from around the Indo-Pacific and around the world. One Minister of Defense made a special effort to be here today. That's my good friend, Oleksiy Reznikov of Ukraine. Oleksiy's seat is currently empty. I'm sure he's working a room somewhere around here. But Oleksiy, if you can hear me, I'd just tell you that your presence here reminds us that we can never take our peace and security for granted. I'm also delighted to be here with Director Haynes and many of our U.S. military leaders, and so thanks to everyone for being here today. This dialogue is always a great opportunity to exchange views. And the only thing more wide-ranging than a conference agenda is a breakfast buffet. You know, this forum began 2 decades ago in a very difficult geopolitical climate. And today we're meeting at another moment of significant consequence. More and more, the countries of the Indo-Pacific have come together around a compelling vision of the future. And they're advancing it in unprecedented ways. It's a vision of a region in which all countries are free to thrive on their own terms without coercion or intimidation or bullying. It is a vision of a free and open and secure Indo-Pacific within a world of rules and rights. And that vision is anchored in some key principles. Respect for sovereignty, adherence to international law, transparency and openness, the free flow of commerce and ideas, human rights and human dignity, equal rights for all states, large and small, and resolving disputes through peaceful dialogue and not coercion or conquest. You know, since the last time that I was in Singapore, we've made some tremendous progress towards our shared vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific. This is actually my 7th trip to the region as Secretary of Defense and my 4th trip to Southeast Asia. And each time, I've had the privilege to listen to leaders expressing their hopes for their countries and their people. And those conversations reinforce a simple truth. And that truth is that no one country can reach this future alone. As we all heard from Prime Minister Albanese last night, each country has a role to play. And the choices made by countries across the region reflect a deepening commitment to these shared principles. Throughout the Biden administration, we've demonstrated what my first speech in Singapore called the power of partnership. We've forged new friendships and deepened old alliances. We've reinforced deterrence to prevent conflict. We've defended the rules and norms that protect us all. And we've moved closer to that bright future that the people of this region want and the one that they deserve. So today I'd like to talk about the historic progress that we've made together over the past year. I'll talk about what the countries of the region are doing to fulfill that vision, what the United States is doing, and most importantly, what we're doing together. Now, clearly, we have much more to do. But our vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific is truly shared and truly achievable. You know, this vision isn't the vision of a single country or the initiative of a single country. It is a common and compelling aspiration. It's about building the basic conditions that let people live their lives without fear and pursue their dreams without limit. And that matters to citizens across the region. You know, some 60% of the world's young people live in this region, and they rightly demand the free flow of ideas. Fishing communities in the Philippines and Vietnam and the Pacific Islands depend on open waterways for their livelihoods. And innovators here in Singapore depend on the rule of law to keep propelling the global economy forward. So these shared principles matter for men, women, and children all around this region. And they cannot be taken for granted. And neither can this region's security or prosperity be taken for granted. Just look at the crisis caused by Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. The Kremlin's indefensible war of choice stands as the bloodiest conflict in Europe since the end of World War II. And Russia's shocking aggression has brought home to people everywhere how dangerous our world would be if big countries could just invade their neighbors with impunity. Russia's invasion shows us all the dangers of disorder and the cost of chaos. And that's why so many countries represented here have supported Ukraine's brave defenders against Russia's war of imperial aggression. And that's why countries of the Indo-Pacific have cast their vote time and again for a future of peace, prosperity, and progress. This year, as president of the G7, Japan has focused on connectivity and on bridging the gap with developing countries. That includes pledging to invest $75 billion in public and private funds for regional infrastructure that can weather the storms of climate change. And India took the helm of the G20 and called on its members to work together to lift up the most vulnerable. And for the first time, India and ASEAN completed a new maritime exercise together. Last year, the Republic of Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy declared that international norms and international order were keys to our shared security and prosperity. Indonesia and Vietnam took bold steps toward resolving their maritime boundary dispute. And this is after 12 hard years of negotiations. And so around the region, countries are matching their words with their actions. And they're insisting on resolving differences through dialogue and calling for even closer cooperation. And so are we. As you may know, I had a brief 41-year career in the U.S. Army. And I learned over and over again that alliances and partnerships make us all stronger. The United States is working together with our friends more closely every day. We're doubling down on our alliances and our partnerships. And our national defense strategy calls for us to work more closely with our allies and partners at every stage of defense planning. And so that spirit of partnership drove our work together to help the region recover from the worst days of the pandemic, including providing more than 360 million safe and effective vaccine doses. And that same spirit will help us tackle other shared threats, from climate change to nuclear proliferation. And so our shared goals are clear: to deter aggression and to deepen the rules and norms that promote prosperity and prevent conflict. So we're stepping up planning and coordination and training with our friends from the East China Sea to the South China Sea to the Indian Ocean. That includes staunch allies such as Australia, Japan, Republic of Korea, the Philippines, and Thailand. It includes as well such valued partners as India, Indonesia, Vietnam, and clearly our host here today in Singapore. Consider the historic strides forward in the U.S.-Philippine alliance. As you've heard, the United States and the Philippines recently designated 4 new locations under our enhanced defense cooperation agreement. And so this will let our forces work together to strengthen Philippine security, to continue to modernize the Philippine military, and to deliver humanitarian aid and disaster relief. We also recently completed the largest and most complex exercise Balakatan ever. More than 17,000 troops participated, and that's nearly twice as many as last year. And for the first time, the exercise featured cyber elements, and HIMARS rocket systems, and Patriot surface-to-air missiles. We're also standing with our Japanese allies as they make historic changes to their national security strategy. This will mean major new investments in Japan's defense, including moves to develop a counter-strike capability. And we're upgrading our joint exercises like Keen Sword and Resolute Dragon to include more complex and realistic scenarios. We also salute the bold steps taken by Japan and the Republic of Korea to work more closely together. Strong ties between Tokyo and Seoul are good for both countries and for the region. We've made tremendous progress in our own trilateral cooperation with Japan and the ROK, including more regular military exercises and greater information sharing. As North Korea continues its nuclear threats and missile tests and other dangerous provocations, we're deepening our extended deterrence with our allies in the Republic of Korea. That includes increased deployments of our most advanced assets and the historic Washington Declaration issued by President Biden and President Yoon. And we're cooperating more deeply than ever with the ROK on joint planning exercises and information sharing and more. At the same time, we're working closely with our allies to upgrade our force posture in the region. We're making our presence more distributed, more agile, and more resilient. And that will bring greater stability and security to the region. So we're committed to ensuring that every country can fly, sail, and operate wherever international law allows. And every country, large and small, must remain free to conduct lawful maritime activities. So we're modernizing our presence so that we can all continue to exercise these rights each and every day. We will forward station our 12th Marine Littoral Regiment, which is the most advanced formation in the United States Marine Corps, in Japan by 2025 to deepen stability in the first island chain. We've committed to increase the rotational presence of U.S. forces in Australia, including rotations of fighters, bombers, task forces, as well as future rotations of ground and maritime capabilities. We're also deeply committed to ensuring that our allies and partners have the capabilities that they need to deter aggression and to increase stability. You see, more capable allies and partners magnify all of our security. So we're making extraordinary investments in our capabilities alongside our allies and partners to reinforce peace and prosperity in this region. President Biden's fiscal year 2024 budget, its budget request, includes the largest procurement request in the history of the Department of Defense and the largest investment ever in research and development. His budget also includes a 40% increase over last year's request for the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. And that's an all-time high of $9.1 billion. We're making bold investments in air power, including an additional $61 billion for our F-35s and F-22s and uncrewed aircraft, and not to mention the B-21 Raider. And we're investing in an expanded fleet of subs, carriers, and destroyers, as well as in space and cyberspace, and long-range fires, including hypersonics. And at every point, we are committed to sharing the advances that we've made to help our partners. For example, our initiative on critical and emerging technology with India lets us explore new ways to co-develop key defense platforms. With Japan, we're working closely together on uncrewed combat air systems and counter-hypersonics, in air defense, and missile defense technologies. With the Philippines, we're negotiating a new security sector assistance roadmap that will bring our alliance into a new era. And through the historic AUKUS partnership, we're cooperating with Australia and the UK on a range of path-breaking capabilities. And of course, earlier this year, we announced how AUKUS will deliver conventionally armed, nuclear-powered submarines to Australia, all with the purpose of upholding peace and security. And just since 2020, we've invested nearly $1.2 billion in security cooperation funding to ensure that Indo-Pacific countries can detect malign actors and deter coercion. And so America's partnerships are bringing the region closer together to help keep it free and open and secure. And you can see that in new forms of trilateral cooperation. The United States, Australia, and Japan are operating together more closely than ever and finding ways to enhance our science and technology cooperation. The United States, Japan, and the ROK are strengthening our interoperability and exploring ways to better share information about missile threats from North Korea. And later today, I'll talk with my Australian, Japanese, and Philippine counterparts about stronger cooperation, especially in the maritime domain. We've also made some important strides forward with Australia, India, and Japan through the Quad. And the Quad is strengthening its maritime cooperation and its work on humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. And all four Quad partners will participate in Exercise Malabar, which will take place off the coast of Australia for the first time this summer. In many of the region's other top exercises are expanding as more countries come together around our shared principles. Last year, our annual Garuda Shield expanded from a bilateral exercise with Indonesia to include 14 countries with more than 4,000 troops. And this year, more than 19 flags will fly over Super Garuda Shield. Next month, Exercise Talisman Sabre with Australia will bring 14 countries together. It will be the largest iteration ever, with more than 30,000 people participating, including a significant contingent from Japan. And it is yet another way that European countries like France and Germany and the UK are standing up for our shared values in the Indo-Pacific. And so, building nimble coalitions to advance our shared vision makes the Indo-Pacific more stable and more resilient. The United States is absolutely proud to expand our cooperation with ASEAN. We remain staunch supporters of ASEAN's centrality and the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. And we stepped up our work through the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus, including new programs to support the next generation of Southeast Asian defense leaders. And we're also continuing to expand our marquee maritime initiative with the Quad. The Indo-Pacific Partnership for Maritime Domain Awareness will help our partners across the region better monitor the waters near their shores. And that will help them combat illegal fishing and better respond to natural disasters. And finally, we're building important new ties in the Pacific Islands. We're working with our Pacific partners to combat illegal and unregulated and unreported fishing through more training and cooperation, such as the U.S. Coast Guard's Shipwriter program. We're working together to strengthen maritime domain awareness and expand the capacity of our Pacific Island partners. And we recently signed a historic defense cooperation agreement with Papua New Guinea. It will modernize our security cooperation and help us to provide humanitarian assistance and disaster relief in the region. And so, ladies and gentlemen, our work together has made this region stronger and safer. Now, we understand the headwinds that we face, but we won't let those headwinds blow us off course. We will continue to stand by our allies and partners as they uphold their rights. We will maintain our vigorous and responsible presence across the Indo-Pacific. And we'll continue to work to ensure that no one country can assert control over shared waterways. In the South China Sea, we will continue to work with our allies and partners to uphold the freedom of navigation and overflight. And let me again underscore the importance of the 2016 ruling by the Arbitral Tribunal. It is legally binding and it is final. We won't be deterred by dangerous operational behavior at sea or in international airspace. The People's Republic of China continues to conduct an alarming number of risky intercepts of U.S. and allied aircraft flying lawfully in international airspace. We've all just seen another troubling case of aggressive and unprofessional flying by the PRC. So we will support our allies and partners as they defend themselves against coercion and bullying. To be clear, we do not seek conflict or confrontation, but we will not flinch in the face of bullying or coercion. Now, all of this is especially important in the Taiwan Strait. I also like to be clear about another point. The United States remains deeply committed to preserving the status quo in the Strait, consistent with our long-standing One China policy and with fulfilling our well-established obligations under the Taiwan Relations Act. Our policy is constant and firm. It is held true across U.S. administrations, and we will continue to categorically oppose unilateral changes to the status quo from either side. I'll also highlight that conflict is neither imminent or inevitable. Deterrence is strong today, and it's our job to keep it that way. You know, the whole world has a stake in maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. The whole world. The security of commercial shipping lanes and global supply chains depends on it. And so does freedom of navigation worldwide. But make no mistake, conflict in the Taiwan Strait would be devastating. So we are determined to maintain peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. And so are a number of countries around the world, and that number continues to grow. President Biden has been clear. The United States does not seek a new Cold War, and competition must not spill over into conflict. And the region should never be split into hostile blocs. Instead, we're working to strengthen the guardrails against conflict and to redouble our diplomacy and to bolster peace and security and stability in the region. The United States believes that open lines of communication with the People's Republic of China are essential, especially between our defense and military leaders. For responsible defense leaders, the right time to talk is any time. The right time to talk is every time. And the right time to talk is now. Dialogue is not a reward. It is a necessity. And a cordial handshake over dinner is no substitute for a substantive engagement. And the more that we talk, the more we can avoid the misunderstandings and miscalculations that could lead to crisis or conflict. You know, I am deeply concerned that the PRC has been unwilling to engage more seriously on better mechanisms for crisis management between our two militaries. But I hope that will change, and soon. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Great powers must be beacons of transparency and responsibility. And the United States is deeply committed to doing our part. And we are determined to keep this region open, peaceful, and prosperous. Ladies and gentlemen, the Indo-Pacific has become an extraordinary example of human progress and peaceful cooperation. I'm proud to be here with you, and the United States is proud to be your partner. As I said before, conflict and strife are not inevitable, but peace and security are not automatic. The region's growing openness and prosperity show the importance of working together and not allowing ourselves to be split apart. The people of the Indo-Pacific have a wider view and a wider vision. So together we can deepen the region's security. Together we can expand the circle of opportunity. And together we can ensure that every citizen of this region has a chance to thrive. So let's continue to draw on the power of partnership. Let's continue to come together in common purpose. And let's continue to build a region prosperity and openness and freedom. It's a real pleasure to stand in your ranks. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for that extremely compelling presentation. I think everyone will have marked down your note that the right time for talk is any time. I was also struck by your phrase earlier in your remarks that the United States is seeking to modernize our presence so that we can exercise our rights. And it invited me to ask you, if I can, the first question. We've seen in the conflict in Ukraine how quickly and imaginatively the forces of Ukraine have been able to incorporate a genuinely diverse range of technologies and systems, including some that are very modern. Can you say a few words about how you think emerging technologies, AI, quantum, cyber, uncrewed vehicles and the like, have a particular role in the mission of deterrence and defense in this theater?
Well, thanks, John. This is really important to us. You know, if you look at our national defense strategy, we talk about the importance of leveraging capability and capacity in all of the warfighting domains: land, air, sea, space, cyberspace. And so our task is to go after those capabilities that support our warfighting concepts that enable us to be not only successful in deterring conflict, but also enable us to be dominant in any future contest. So as we go after those capabilities to support our warfighting concepts, we're looking to bring things together and synchronize them and network them in ways that we've not done before. So we're going after capabilities like you mentioned, quantum computing, edge computing, AI, and a number of other things. It's one thing to say that, but I think you have to make an effort to invest in the right kinds of things and align your budget to match what your strategy is. So we went through great pains to link our budget requests to our strategy, line by line almost, and it's probably the best I've ever seen. I applaud the staff that really did a tremendous job there. So it's one thing even when you get the capabilities, you have to make sure that you've organized your organization to be able to manage those things, and then you have to drive the organization to success. I made a change to our staff. I created a position that oversees the integration of our digital work and also AI. So I have a chief digital and AI officer that is really doing a phenomenal job of aligning the organization across the board. So getting the capabilities is one thing, but then you got to organize and you got to drive to create the capabilities that we're all looking for. And then you have to work with industry. And I know there are a number of industry leaders in this crowd, and I make an effort to talk to industry leadership to tell them where we want to go, what our needs are, and how we intend to employ the capabilities that we're asking for. And I would say that in the United States, our industrial base is really one of our strategic advantages. But, unless we're communicating the right things to industry, we won't be where we need to be in the long term. So that remains a work in progress. But the kinds of things that you're talking about in terms of technology are the kinds of things that will help us maintain a competitive edge going forward. It is very important to us. It is fundamental to our national defense strategy. And again, this is something that we remain sighted on each and every day.
Well, thank you very much. I'll take, with your permission, about 3 or 4 from the floor. Don't worry about joining late. I don't necessarily respect an absolute order of precedence, so I'll call on 4 or 5 people first. First, you mentioned SecDef the Philippines, so Jeffrey Ordonell from the Philippines first.
Hi, thank you. So according to the 2022 report to Congress released by your department, sir, if China continues the pace of its nuclear expansion, it will likely field a stockpile of about 1,500 warheads. And that's significant given that the legal limit to the U.S. operationally deployed nuclear warheads under the New START agreement is about 1,500. And so that means China will achieve nuclear parity with the United States in about 15 years. My question is, are there any updates on U.S. efforts to push for some sort of an arms control deal with China? And are your Asian allies involved in that kind of discussion? Thank you.
Let me begin this by saying we are serious about our commitment to extended deterrence. And I have spoken with our allies and partners in the room a number of times on this particular issue. And you should know that the President of the United States and all of us are very serious about this commitment. But in terms of specific updates on engagements with the PRC on arms control, no, I don't have any updates for you there. You got to talk to them first. So as soon as they answer the phone, maybe we'll get some work done here.
From the United States, Bonnie Glaser.
Thank you, John. Secretary Austin, senior Chinese officials are communicating to their foreign counterparts that the United States is seeking to goad China into using force against Taiwan. This is reminiscent of the October surprise in 2020, when China seemed convinced that the United States was trying to precipitate a crisis in the South China Sea. So I agree, dialogue, especially purposeful dialogue, is essential. If you had the opportunity to meet with General Lee, What would you tell him about U.S. objectives in the Taiwan Strait beyond the fact that the United States supports maintenance of the status quo and opposes use of force?
Well, thanks for the question. Let me say up front that I respectfully disagree with the premise of the question in that we are trying to goad China into a conflict. It's in fact just the opposite. We are doing everything in our power to make sure that we maintain a free and open Indo-Pacific because, as I said earlier in my remarks, this is important to all of us in this region. In terms of, what I would say to my counterpart, well, with respect to Taiwan, it's the same thing that I said to him the last time, and that is our policy has not changed, and we do not desire to see a change, a unilateral change by any party, and so any kind of disagreements ought to be resolved through diplomacy. And again, it's important to maintain peace and stability in this region, as I mentioned earlier. Conflict in the Straits would affect the global economy in ways that we cannot imagine. But thanks for the question.
So then from China, Xizhan.
Thank you, Dr. Chipman. Good morning, Mr. Secretary. The theme of our plenary session here is U.S. leadership. But how to play the role of leadership? On one hand, you claim to support the centrality of ASEAN in the region. On the other hand, the U.S. established multilateral institutions such as Quad and AUKUS. Is there any contradiction between U.S.-led institutions and the centrality of ASEAN in the region? How to guarantee ASEAN centrality? Thank you.
I don't think I got the entire gist of the question, but I think your question was centered on AUKUS and whether or not that promotes security and stability in the region or drives us to conflict. It absolutely promotes greater stability and security. It provides a valued and highly capable ally with additional capability that I think will be a generational capability. And so I am confident that this will add greater stability and security to this region. I am proud of the work that we're doing with AUKUS, and I know my good friends, my colleagues from Australia and the UK are here, and I look forward to having additional discussions with them about AUKUS and updating our progress. But I think this will add significantly to our efforts to maintain peace and stability in the region.
And from Vietnam, Bích Tran.
Thank you, Dr. Chipman. Secretary, so you mentioned Vietnam is one of the important partners of the United States in this region. So I wonder whether, I think that it says a lot about the United States respects the different political system of Vietnam. So I wonder whether you agree that being a communist is not a problem, but being a revisionist may be another issue. Thanks. So kind of differentiate between a communist state and a revisionist state.
I heard you say being a communist is not a problem, but being a revolutionary is an issue. But hey, listen, we are focused on what you heard me talk about earlier, and that is making sure that we maintain peace, security, and stability in this region, and we maintain access to international airways and waterways. We don't, in our partnerships and our alliances, we don't ask people to choose, or countries to choose between us and another country. We don't ask countries and impose our will on countries. Again, we want to work on those things that are of common interest to all of us, to both of us. So I'll leave it at that.
From France, François Bourg.
Thank you very much for your statements and for recalling also the role which some of your European partners are playing in the region. You emphasized that you are in favor of the status quo on Taiwan and that conflict was neither imminent nor inevitable. Those are obviously very welcome statements. Yet we have been hearing over the last couple of years a number of active duty, high-ranking American officers actually talk about imminence, 2025 and 2027 being the most frequently cited dates. Are we going to continue to hear active duty, high-ranking American officers take that line? Or will there be, as we would put it in French, silence dans les rangs, silence in the ranks?
Well, first of all, I believe what they are pointing to in some cases is the fact that President Xi challenged his military to develop the capabilities to conduct military operations by 2027. It doesn't mean that he's made a decision to do that. In terms of whether or not our officers, what they will say in the future, they have the ability to say what they're thinking, and we always welcome that. But my opinion is that a conflict is neither imminent or is it inevitable, and so. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that we're doing the right things to maintain the status quo. But, the way that you deter any misguided decision is by having a combat credible military, and we have one, and we will continue to have one. And our officers that are in charge of maintaining that combat credible force have to remain focused on making sure that they are ready to address any situation or circumstance. I know my Indo-PACOM commander is in the room somewhere, and he'd be the first to stand up and tell you, boss, you've charged me to do that, and by golly, I am going to be ready no matter what happens. And that's what I want him to do. But again, I don't think that a conflict is inevitable, nor do I think at this point that it's imminent.
And from the Netherlands and the IISS, Veerle Nowens.
Secretary of Defense, you made mention to the UK, Germany, and France in the Indo-Pacific. I wanted to ask, how important is it for the United States, for European countries to be engaged militarily in the Indo-Pacific?
How important is it for European militaries to be engaged militarily in the Indo-Pacific? How does it add value to the effort, I think is the...
Well, the first thing I'll tell you is we're not trying to create a NATO in the Indo-Pacific. And we have a number of colleagues here today from Europe. And I'm really glad to see them here because they all have interests in this region. And those interests are not just military. They cover whole of government. And so they would tell you that they have an interest in the region because of all the great things that happen here. So, and Prime Minister Albanese talked about some of those things yesterday. The rate at which this region is growing, the capability, the capacity that this region has. It is rightful that European countries would remain interested in making sure that we have good relationships with the countries here in the region. And I'm confident that that's why they're here. But they'll probably tell you themselves because you'll interact with them later on in the day. So.
Absolutely right. And from Indonesia, Dewi Fortuna Anwar.
Thank you, John. I'd like to ask about the relations between the Quad and ASEAN. As you know, the Secretary, as you know, there have been a lot of initial skepticisms and concern that the Quad may undermine ASEAN centrality. But I'm very happy to hear again that, you have stressed again the ASEAN centrality. And recently, President Widodo actually said that, Quad and ASEAN are not competitors, they could be partners. Now, I'd like to tease out more. Do you envisage a Quad ASEAN as an institution cooperation, or is it be Quad and individual ASEAN countries' cooperation, given the fact that all Quad countries are also members of the East Asia Summit? So what would be the format of such cooperation? Thank you.
I think it's a question about the complex Rubik's Cube of the regional architecture in this region and how each of these different minilateral and established multilateral arrangements interconnect.
Well, you know, I think we should take what we have, and which is what we've done and what we'll continue to do, in terms of bilateral, trilateral, and multilateral alliances and partnerships, and build on those incrementally. Again, I don't think we should drive things to go in one direction or another. We're not trying to create NATO in the Indo-Pacific. We value our relationships with our allies and partners. And each of our allies and partners has, they have their own self-interest, we understand that, and we want to make sure that we're helping them protect their self-interest, and that they, when possible, are working with us and with other countries to provide for a free and open Indo-Pacific.
Great. I'm going to take two questions in succession and let the Secretary then answer those, and we'll conclude the session with that. My first of this duet is Sharon Nanau.
Yes, sir. My question is on USA through this partnership and cooperation is pushing United States agenda for smaller island states. Example, in the Solomon Islands, the US was absent for over 20 plus years, and only because of its diplomatic switch to China, they've reopened their embassy last year. So through this cooperation, you've mentioned allies and partners, but is it another form of pushing USA agendas, especially for smaller island states who don't have a leverage when coming to interacting with the developed or bigger countries?
Thank you very much. He's got that on small island states and their place in U.S. engagement in the region. And from Ireland, but also the Financial Times, Dimitri Sevastopoulou.
Thank you, and also a very small island state. Secretary Austin, good morning. You've made a lot of progress creating a more lattice security architecture in the Indo-Pacific, but one thing that's missing is joint operational war plans with allies, particularly Japan and Australia, for Taiwan contingency. So my question is, how urgent is the need for joint operational war plans, and how hard is it proving to develop them?
On the issue of the importance of small island states, clearly they are important. And I think you know that for many of the small island states, we've had relationships that go back for decades. We value and treasure those relationships. And if you look at the number of people in some of those states that serve in the United States military, it really is impressive. So we want to make sure that we continue to build on those relationships and continue to account for your needs and your concerns. And most recently, you saw that the President held a summit where he had Pacific Islander leadership into the White House, and it was a great event. And I can tell you firsthand that this is really important to him. On the issue of joint operational war plans, you probably know that I'm not going to discuss any kind of war plan in a forum like this and what we're doing and not doing. But what I will tell you is that it's important to work hard to increase our interoperability. Now, it's important to have, where possible, compatible platforms. It's really important to make sure that you have, policies and procedures that serve you well and that, your allies or partners understand and are familiar with. But what happens when you work together as a joint or a combined force is that you continue to build trust among your forces and the forces that you're working with. And at the end of the day, you can't surge trust. It's got to be there up front. And so I'm proud of the work that we're doing to increase interoperability in the region. That interoperability will serve us well no matter what challenge presents itself. We have come a long way, but we are by no means where any of us want to be eventually. So we'll continue to work on that. And for all of you that have provided opportunities for my troops to work with your troops, let me say thanks again. I cannot tell you how important that is. In terms of specific plans, again, we don't discuss plans in public forums, but I will assure you that we will continue to work with our allies to make sure that we think about and account for future contingencies. John, thanks so much for allowing me to be here, and I guess we'll leave it at that.
Absolutely, since it's 9:30 and it just hit 9:31, so I want to thank you very much for your presentation. I want to ask everybody in the room to do two things. First, stay seated, because the second plenary will start almost immediately as soon as our next three speakers are mic'd up. And secondly, and importantly, to thank the Secretary of Defense for his presentation and the conversation. He's animated. Right, so I hope all of you just got the hint. As the music gets into minor key, you have to move quickly to assume your seat, and we can begin the session. The second plenary is entitled Building a Stable and Balanced Asia Pacific, and we have an extremely stable and balanced panel to that end with our good friend Carlito Galvez, the Senior Undersecretary Officer in charge in the Department of Defense in the Philippines. I should say that I was in Manila in December and had some excellent meetings, including with Senator Lagarde, who was here earlier this morning. And I think everybody will be fascinated to hear about Philippines' new defense and security policy under the Marcos administration, which has led to, as we might soon hear, a diverse range of new and fresh bilateralized arrangements. Really pleased to have, for the first time at the IISS Shangri-La Dialogue from our home state, as it were, Secretary of State for Defense Ben Wallace, who has been Secretary of Defense for a considerable amount of time and built a range of personal defense diplomatic experiences from that. And we're really pleased, given also the previous announcement of the Indo-Pacific tilt of the United Kingdom, to hear him today. And finally, for her second appearance at the Shangri-La Dialogue, Anita Anand, the Minister of National Defense of Canada, which is, of course, famously an important Pacific state. So now that the room is settled and I assume attentive, could I invite Carlito Galvez to take the podium and address the second plenary? Thank you.
To my fellow speakers, Excellencies, honored guests, Senator Lagarde, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant morning to all. Indeed, it is my pleasure to attend the IISS Shangri-La Dialogue for the first time and be in the company of such esteemed audience. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. John Chipman and the ISS organizers for giving me this opportunity to take the floor in this prestigious forum, and the Singapore Ministry of Defense for the excellent arrangement accorded to the Philippine delegation. For the next few minutes, allow me to share the Philippine perspective on the topic at hand, building a stable and balanced Asia-Pacific. Since the end of the most ubiquitous bipolar international order, the demise of the Cold War alliance system, the Asia-Pacific has been characterized by decades of relative peace and stability. So much so that it has become fashionable to talk about Asia-Pacific security from the lens of geoeconomics rather than geopolitics, particularly as the region has become and continues to be the most promising in terms of economic dynamism. However, as we now realize, rapid economic growth in this region also comes at a heavy price, ushering the rise of the new power centers and along with it, a new era of competition for wealth and influence. Today, the return of geopolitics has magnified the long overlooked but enormously complexity that is already endemic to a region beset with historical animosities and with the greatest number of unresolved land and maritime disputes. The issues in the South China Sea and the East China Sea and the strains in the cross-strait have particularly emerged as plus points in the region. The increasing provocations in the Korean Peninsula, as well as the skirmishes in the Sino-Indian and Indian-Pakistan borders, have also been fueling mutual suspicion between parties involved. 5,000 miles away, the war in Ukraine has showed us that geopolitical calamities, which we thought have turned highly unlikely since the end of the Cold War, are certainly still entirely plausible. How then do we avert the complete unraveling of the long peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific amid this increasingly volatile and uncertain security environment? At this juncture, allow me to discuss two significant points. First is upholding the primacy of the rule of law. And second, the continued pursuit of dialogue and multilateralism. In upholding the rule of law, as a small nation relative to big and powerful neighbor with a grand design on its territory, the Philippines has always believed that international law is the greatest equalizer among states. It is exactly this belief that made us confidently resort to the compulsory dispute settlement mechanism of the United Nations Convention of the Laws of the Seas, or UNCLOS, and the Hague Tribunal. We view the 2016 arbitration award as not only setting the reason and right in the South China Sea, but also as an inspiration for how matters should be considered by states facing similar challenging circumstances. We underscore that the award is not directed at any country, with the Philippines seeing it as it should be seen as favoring all nations subscribing to the rule of law. The award is conclusive, as it is indisputable, definitively clarifying a legal situation beyond the reach of arms to change. It is authoritatively settled the status of historic right in the South China Sea and declared as without legal effect claims that exceed geographical and substantive limits of maritime entitlement under UNCLOS. As the chief architect of the Philippine foreign policy and the commander-in-chief of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has strongly emphasized his directive to safeguard every square inch of our territory from any foreign power. Mindful of his guidance, UNCLOS and the 2016 Arbitration Award are and will continue to be the twin anchors of our policies and actions in the West Philippine Sea and broader South China Sea. Anchored on the transparent laws, the Philippines will likewise continue to seek for transparency of actions in the maritime domain, thrusting gray zone shadows into the light. At this juncture, allow me to express that the Philippines welcomes the increasing number of states that have come in support of the award and what it stands for, an affirmation of the preeminence of the law and the triumph of amity over ambition. We realize that right alone does not make might, as it is ultimately your support that will preserve the global order at sea and uphold the universally recognized principles of international law. Along this line, we welcome the G7's recent statement, which reaffirms the legally binding nature of the award and all other statements made by the governments around the world will uphold the ruling as a milestone in corpus of international law. In the same vein that the Philippines underscores the resolution of the complex competing claims in the South China Sea in accordance with international law, we also hope that relevant parties to other land and maritime disputes in the region would find peaceful and effective ways to manage their diverging positions without prejudice to their respective legitimate rights. As the old adage goes, good fences make good neighbors, as it is only when neighbors have clear boundaries and respect for such boundaries would relations remain genuinely amicable. The 2014 agreement between the Philippines and Indonesia concerning the limitation of our exclusive economic zone and similar maritime delimitation agreements reached by other countries in the region, as well as the resolution of territorial issues between Indonesia and Malaysia over Sipadan and Litigan in 2022, and Singapore and Malaysia for Pedra Branca and Middle Rocks, and the Southern Leads in 2008, are a strong manifestation that resort in international law continues to be paramount in the peaceful resolution of fundamental differences. On the pursuit of dialogue and multilateralism, I understand, however, that fostering the political will and mutual trust to sit down for constructive dialogue and reach an agreement to abide by a shared system of norms and values is not an easy feat. Nonetheless, I dare to affirm that the multilateral system, even in the face of heightened geopolitical tensions, remains a uniquely inclusive vehicle for managing mutual interdependencies in ways that enhance both national and international welfare. In many ways, a remarkable example that multilateralism works even in the region of diverse as Asia-Pacific is manifested by the history of the ASEAN. As enshrined in the 1967 ASEAN Declaration, the inception of the ASEAN was founded on a partnership of equality and mutual benefit, with member states undertaking not only to ensure their peaceful and progressive national development, but also to put their differences aside so as to proceed with active collaboration. Such declaration by nation, which only 2 years earlier were in a state of confrontation with each other, could be regarded as a near miracle. And the fact that ASEAN has weathered all difficulties since then means that its foundation has been solidly laid. Ladies and gentlemen, acting in isolation and decoupling amid the declining state of goodwill in the region would only serve the return of our Iron Curtain that will undermine any potential for confidence building and cooperation between and among us. It is in this context that ASEAN remains as a cornerstone of the Philippine foreign policy. ASEAN's principle of openness, transparency, and inclusivity represents its continued equitable treatment of norms and principles, offering a neutral ground where all table their interests in the region. It is only in this light that the Philippines continues to seek a substantive ASEAN-China Code of Conduct in the South China Sea through a process that perseveres despite the pressures of destabilizing actions and incidents on intimidations. Wars are not inevitable, but a result of our grave failure to resolve our fundamental differences. When the risk of conflict looms, it is time for more dialogue, not less. It is along this line that ASEAN must be strengthened as an institution for building strategic trust and cooperations which are at the core of preemption. I am pleased to note that just recently, the Philippines hosted the second ASEAN Multilateral Naval Exercises, or AMNEX, an initiative which promotes interoperability in response to common maritime challenges that shape the regional security architecture. The exercise was also held back-to-back with the 17th ASEAN Navy's Chiefs meeting, which adopted the Navy-to-Navy guidelines for maritime interactions with the aim to contribute to the implementation of international maritime law and convention. In conclusion, I would like to end my remarks with a quote of Albert Einstein, that peace cannot be kept by force, it can only be achieved by understanding. Ladies and gentlemen, the preservation of prolonged peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific rests on our accountability to the rule of law and the success of our cooperation amid diversity. As we face increasing geopolitical risks, which are compounded even further by the consequence of climate change and the legacy of the pandemic, the Philippines remains committed to diplomacy and dialogue to build the aggregate resilience of the region as a whole. Thank you for your attention and mabuhay.
Carlito Galvez, thank you very much for, at the start, reminding us of the increased emphasis that the Philippines is now having to place on coastal defense, but also near the end of your remarks, reminding us for quite how long a time ASEAN has been discussing a code of conduct with China. And I'm sure we will examine both those points in detail in the conversation Could I now invite the Secretary of State for Defense, Ben Wallace of the United Kingdom, to take the podium and address our second plenary.
Good morning, and thank you to ISS for hosting, and it's a privilege to be here in Singapore, an island nation and trading powerhouse with which the UK has much in common, not to mention a shared history. And I'm delighted to share the panel with my colleagues from Canada and the Philippines, just two of the nations we're working closely with to keep strengthening the international order that benefits everyone. Lots has happened since the last UK Defence Secretary spoke here, and the world already looks different in so many ways. We fought off the pandemic. We did that by collaboration, not by isolation. The UK has had 3 prime ministers, and we've lost our great Queen. Her similarly great namesake, the Queen Elizabeth Aircraft Carrier Group, made her maiden visit to the Indo-Pacific in 2021. And that same year, the United Kingdom published the Integrated Review, signalling our increased commitment to this region. That review has been updated this year, and we're pressing ahead with our tilt to the Indo-Pacific, not least becoming ASEAN's first new dialogue partner this century. Of course, events in Europe are focusing us closer to home at the moment. Russia's illegal war in Ukraine is forcing a rethink of the Euro-Atlantic security architecture, and it has spurred yet more countries to seek the collective security of NATO membership, precisely what President Putin claimed he was acting to prevent. But as busy as things are at home, developments continue apace. The Indo-Pacific economic performance makes this year the world's undisputed growth engine, 40% of global GDP, 60% of global shipping, home to half the world's population and some of the fastest growing economies and most innovative economies in the world. But apart from seeking to secure blocks of interest, we believe this region offers enormous economic opportunity for all. It's why European companies and countries are looking east, and why the United Kingdom government considers our interests to lie as much here as they do in Europe. Indeed, in 2022, our total exports to the Indo-Pacific amounted to £127 billion, a remarkable increase of 22% on the previous year. NATO membership, precisely what President Putin claimed he was acting to prevent. But as busy as things are at home, developments continue apace. The Indo-Pacific economic performance makes this year the world's undisputed growth engine. 40% of global GDP, 60% of global shipping, home to half the world's population and some of the fastest growing economies and most innovative economies in the world. But apart from seeking to secure blocks of interest, we believe this region offers enormous economic opportunity for all. It's why European companies and countries are looking east, and why the United Kingdom government considers our interests to lie as much here as they do in Europe. Indeed, in 2022, our total exports to the Indo-Pacific amounted to £127 billion, a remarkable increase of 22% on the previous year. Yet just as we seek to benefit from the opportunities here, so must we also share responsibility for the challenges. And in both regards, none are bigger than the epoch-defining rise of China, as it was described in our integrated review refresh. We are all now navigating the consequences of China's rise, both those opportunities and those challenges, lifting vast numbers of people out of poverty, trading with the world, and the undeniable truth that none of our most fundamental global issues can be solved without engagement with China. Be they climate change, energy and food security, economic stagnation, tech regulation, and nuclear proliferation. But must we also speak plainly and acknowledge that there are also challenges from that rise? Illegal fishing tensions in territorial waters, sovereignty disputes, and debt diplomacy. This session, Mr. Chairman, asks how can we create balance and stability in the Indo-Pacific? And many do consider that question purely through the lens of China and the balancing of some great power competition. But we don't agree it has to be. We can do this in three ways. And this might surprise you coming from a defense secretary, but those ways are not primary militarily. First and foremost, by upholding international rules and promoting common standards. Why rules? Because the balance and stability we are talking about today is ultimately based on adherence to shared rules. The Ukrainian invasion is a tragic reminder of the terrible costs when leaders disregard human life, national sovereignty, and the rules-based international system. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, is constantly claiming that the system is simply made up by the United States as they go along. Of course, this is a fabrication. He's talking about the very system, including the United Nations Charter, that we conceived, including Russia, together after the Second World War, and for which we fought together in the hope of saving future generations from the scourge of war. Of course, Russia doesn't want ordinary countries to now benefit from those protections or the freedom to choose, because they might not choose Russia. Putin's invasion of Ukraine, trampling sovereignty, brutalizing innocent civilians, is a result of its utter disregard for rules and the belief that might is right. Well, they're wrong, and that's been proven by the international community's determination to enforce those rules. Because rules are agnostic of nations' military or economic power. They are common to all our needs. Their adherence prevents competition escalating into conflict, and disputes are resolved without fear or favor. What unites us is that rules apply to us all, regardless of actor or geography. We are all equal in the eyes of the law. It provides a level playing field. It ensures fair play. Which is one of the reasons, I believe, why Singapore has been so successful in recent decades. Because of the respect here for the regulatory environment, anti-corruption, dispute resolution, and fair play. And it works here in Singapore, why can't it work elsewhere? Whether you are the smallest country seeking to protect your fishing rights or the largest seeking a greater share of global trade, the rules-based system is there to protect and enable us all. Yes, all, including China. It is why the UK strongly believes so strongly in protecting the rights of littoral states in their exclusive economic zones, as well as in the importance of holding the United Nations Convention of Law on the Sea. We reject any claims that do not adhere to its tenets. Attempts to restrict the global common are fundamentally damaging to us all and our trade. If international treaties bearing the signature of 157 parties are junked on a whim, this represents an attack not just on one treaty, but on the entire international system. So the United Kingdom will continue to demonstrate that all parties should stick as close as possible to UNCLOS, because responsible powers have a duty to protect international rules, and neither can they take a backseat in evolving those rules as well. We want a 21st system of laws designed by all, for all. The second way we maintain balance and stability is by backing free trade. The UK has always believed in free commerce and capital flows. The more we open up competition, the more we reduce overdependence and build resilience. And neither can we afford to decouple commercially or diplomatically. We believe the best resilience comes from diversification, not from protectionism. That's why the UK is working to diversify our supply chains. It's why we have done deals with Japan, Australia, and of course Canada. And why we are now enthusiastic new members of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. You cannot put a price on the ability to sell to 500 million people with a combined GDP of £11 trillion. And we're building on that momentum, having signed free trade agreements with Australia and New Zealand, as well as Singapore, Japan, Vietnam, and the Republic of Korea. Third and finally, the way we preserve stability is through the promotion of our principles and values. Coming to Shangri-La and visiting Singapore, I feel immediately at home. Despite very different national systems, we share many of the same principles and values that believe that all nations have the right to chart their own course, instinctive understanding of the importance of global trade, and above all, a belief in fair play. You don't need to have mastered the rules of cricket to know that fair play is ingrained in the British psyche. No matter how big or small you are, how rich or poor, we believe nations should treat each other fairly with respect. The UN conventions reinforce that as a P5 nation, we believe we have a responsibility to help uphold those rules around the globe. And that's where defence does come in, because it has an important supporting role to play, not just in hard power projection, but soft power promotion. The skills and capability of our armed forces are there to help friends when they're in trouble, from humanitarian assistance and disaster relief to crisis management and civilian evacuations, and ultimately in times of conflict. I know you share that view, many of you here. We've seen it in Ukraine. Alongside our troops training Ukrainians in the United Kingdom are Australians and New Zealanders as well as Canadians. The US-chaired Ukrainian Defence Contact Group now includes many countries represented in this room. And we appreciate the very material support that you are sending to Ukraine to help return stability to our continent. And that's because you recognise, as our Prime Minister said recently, the Atlantic and Pacific security is indivisible. Our security is your security. And that's why the UK is becoming more proactive and more persistently engaged in the Indo-Pacific. We've been using our warships HMS Spey and Tamar, our two Royal Navy ships permanently deployed in the region, to deliver humanitarian aid to Sami at Tonga, to help enforce the sanctions against the DPRK, and to undertake 16 port visits and over 20 regional exercises. We've expanded our network of defence attachés and regional defence staff, including the recently restored defence section in Manila in the Philippines, to deepen our understanding and influence over 20 countries. And we've been growing our wider defence presence in the region, whether here in Singapore, our garrison in Brunei, and the recent reciprocal access agreement with Japan. As a result of all of this, we've been able to increase our tempo, conducting over 60 defence activities in the last 2 years alone, from exercises and training teams to staff talks and personal exchanges. And as I speak, there are 45 officers from the regional partners here today attending professional military education courses back in the United Kingdom. And all that activity helps to build those partnerships, because it's only by deepening friendships, knitting together a tapestry of partners and allies, that we can collectively secure our populations and our interests. The UK is a proud member of the five-power defence arrangement, the region's original defence arrangement, established when its security landscape looked very different. We celebrated the FPDA's 50th anniversary in 2021, and from my discussions while here, I'm convinced that it has an even more important role to play in the years ahead. In parallel, we're now entertaining new partnerships with the recent announcements of AUKUS and GCAP with Japan and Italy. And for the avoidance of doubt, these are not just about countering threats or the submarines and planes we're building. They are about a collaboration effort that underpins them, partnering for technology, transferring skills, skill sharing, and information exchanges. They are a national and generational enterprise. They will allow us to sustain our capabilities over a long term, and they'll strengthen our supply chain resilience to help us prosper through the 2020s and 2030s. That's why ASEAN is also so important, and why in recognition of ASEAN centrality, I formally applied in March this year for the UK to join the ADMM+. It's this partnership principle that runs through everything we're doing in UK defence, as much as it does in our trade. And it's in our refreshed integrated review, and will shortly be reinforced by our Defence Command paper, Refresh. And it's central to everything defence engagement, and every exchange programme and capability programme, and every exercise or operation. In 2025, our carrier strike group will be returning to the Indo-Pacific. It's a great symbol of our partnership approach, showing that in a more turbulent world, the United Kingdom will not retreat to its own shores, but continue sailing far over the horizon, using our unique convening power to bring like-minded partners together, whether they are in this world, wherever they are in this world, protecting our freedoms to navigate and operate today, and shaping our ability to travel and trade long into the future, so we can focus on what really matters, building the best future for all our people. Thank you.
Secretary of Defense, thank you very much for providing us, I think, in summary.
Well, thank you so much, John, and good morning, everybody. Bonjour tout le monde. Secretary Wallace, Senior Undersecretary Galvez, it is an absolute pleasure to be back here in Singapore for my second Shangri-La Dialogue as Minister of National Defence of Canada. And let me start by thanking you, John, as well as James Crabtree and the ISS team for putting on such a stellar event. You're really rocking it, so thank you so much. Now today, we are here to discuss building a stable and balanced Asia-Pacific. And I'd like to tell you what Canada brings to the table in advancing that goal. Canada is a Pacific country. Our Pacific coast is 25,000 kilometers long. 6 of our top 13 trading partners are found in this region. Et aussi un Canadien sur 5 tire des origines familiales dans la région, comme moi-même. Aujourd'hui, l'Indo-Pacifique est la région économique qui connaît la croissance la plus rapide au monde. As a Pacific country, Canada has a keen interest in building a region that is stable, that is balanced. What does this mean? It means an Indo-Pacific where international rules and norms prevail and all actors engage responsibly. An Indo-Pacific where disputes are resolved peacefully. And ultimately, an Indo-Pacific that is free, that is open, and that is inclusive. These objectives are at the very heart of Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy, which we announced last November. Notre stratégie est une feuille de route complète et à long terme visant à renforcer tous les domaines de nos relations dans cette région, qu'il s'agisse du commerce, du développement ou de la défense. Our strategy seeks to open up new opportunities with North Pacific partners like South Korea and Japan. It recognizes and supports ASEAN centrality. And it is forthright about our relationship with China. China is an increasingly disruptive global power that increasingly disregards international rules and norms. Notre approche est claire et responsable. Nous défendrons toujours nos intérêts nationaux et l'ordre international fondé sur des règles. We have to maintain open channels of communication to avoid misunderstanding and have difficult conversations where necessary, because these are the moments where dialogue is needed most. Canada always seeks coexistence and collaboration. We will challenge China where we ought to. We will cooperate with China to find solutions on global issues. Our Indo-Pacific strategy is not just a policy document, because building a stable and secure region requires tangible contributions. Backed by an investment of over $720 million to promote peace, resilience, and security in the region, we are stepping up with concrete new commitments. First, under the Indo-Pacific strategy, Canada is boosting its annual naval deployments in the Indo-Pacific from 2 warships to 3. We will now annually deploy an additional warship from our Atlantic coast, growing Canada's regional presence, particularly in the Indian Ocean. Our bigger footprint this year begins, and the Atlantic-based frigate HMCS Montreal and the replenishment unit MV Asterix are in the region right now and actually visited Singapore just a few days ago. 2 more frigates will deploy from our Pacific coast in the summer, and our ships will continue to operate throughout the Indo-Pacific. As part of these deployments, our ships sail in the South and East China Seas and through the Taiwan Strait in full accordance with international law. This is a clear signal of Canada's commitment to working with allied and partner navies towards regional peace, stability, and prosperity. And we will always act in accordance with international law, including high seas navigation rights as outlined in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Our Indo-Pacific strategy also boosts Canada's participation in multilateral exercises in the region, so that our armed forces can have a more frequent and fulsome presence here. The strategy also means that we will work together and train and learn from our partners in the region, such as Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Vietnam. And that includes initiatives to advance women, peace, and security initiatives by supporting the meaningful participation of women in uniform. This is an area where Canada has much to share, and importantly, much to learn from our partners in the region. And in this regard, I am thrilled to be joined in Singapore by Canada's Ambassador for Women, Peace and Security, Ms. Jackie O'Neill, who just visited Vietnam and Indonesia on her way to Singapore. Enfin, notre stratégie lance de nouvelles initiatives pour aider nos partenaires militaires à renforcer leur cybersécurité et leur cybercapacité afin qu'ils puissent détecter les cybermenaces et y répondre plus rapidement et plus efficacement. Since 2018, Canada's main Indo-Pacific military mission has been known as Operation Projection. To reflect our enhanced and growing presence, I am pleased to announce that starting this year, this operation will be replaced by Operation Horizon. Operation Horizon will implement the defense elements of our Indo-Pacific strategy, deploying more naval assets, participating in more multilateral exercises, and strengthening our military-to-military cooperation. We know that our allies and partners want to see more of Canada, and I hear it wherever I go, and through Operation Horizon, you will see more of us. A stable and balanced Indo-Pacific also requires a safe and stable Korean peninsula. 516 Canadians made the ultimate sacrifice during the Korean War, the 3rd deadliest conflict in Canada's history. And as Prime Minister Trudeau underlined during his recent visit to Korea, Canada has never left the Korean Peninsula. Our Canadian Armed Forces have continuously served in Korea through the United Nations Command to promote peace on the peninsula. And today I am so pleased to announce that the next Deputy Commander of the United Nations Command in the Republic of Korea will be a Canadian general or flag officer. This will be the second time that a Canadian has held this vitally important post, demonstrating our leadership in the Korean Peninsula. In fact, the first non-American to ever assume that role was a Canadian as well. He is with me here today, and he is now our Chief of Defense Staff, General Wayne Eyre. Thank you, General Eyre, for your leadership. To further support stability on the peninsula, Canada recently announced the extension of Operation Neon, through which we regularly contribute ships, aircraft, and personnel to the multinational effort monitoring UN Security Council sanctions against North Korea. One of those aircraft, a Royal Canadian Air Force CP-140 Aurora, recently completed a 6-week deployment conducting surveillance to identify suspected violations of UNSC sanctions. And when we deploy our aircraft to monitor United Nations Security Council sanctions against North Korea, we expect all actors in the region to engage responsibly, behave safely, and conduct themselves professionally. Responsible engagement and safe behavior are a cornerstone of a stable and balanced Indo-Pacific, and Canada believes strongly in being transparent, open, and adhering to the international rules and norms that underpin our collective security. Finally, a stable and balanced Indo-Pacific depends on partnerships. L'année dernière, par exemple, le ministre de la Défense, le Dr. Ng Eng Hen et moi-même avons signé un accord de coopération en matière de défense entre Singapour et le Canada. And today I am thrilled to confirm that recently the Republic of Korea and Canada signed a 10-year Memorandum of Understanding on Defense Research and Development. This is just an example, my friends, of how we will continue to forge resilient relationships with our closest partners in the Indo-Pacific, and we will build new partnerships with important regional leaders, India, for example. Canada believes in ASEAN centrality as the foundation for cooperation and stability in the region, which is why we are working to deepen our security cooperation with its members. We appreciate ASEAN's support for Canadian observer status in the 2 ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus experts working groups. We were delighted when ASEAN leaders recently adopted a regional plan of action on women, peace, and security. And I am pleased to say that Canada is on track to finalize its strategic partner status with ASEAN by September, which will enable us to work even more closely with our partners in this vitally important region. Of course, we will always remain tightly coordinated with our closest allies, including our Five Eyes partners, and we are always looking for ways to advance and strengthen our relationships. My friends, every issue that matters to global security in the coming decades, democracy, climate change, human rights, artificial intelligence, and more, will all run through this region. As a Pacific nation itself, Canada has much to offer the region, and the region has many opportunities in turn for Canada. Through our Indo-Pacific strategy, you will continue to see more and more of Canada. And through Operation Horizon, which I've announced today, you will see a larger Canadian defense presence right here in the Indo-Pacific. Alors que l'Indo-Pacifique devient de plus en plus central Pour la sécurité mondiale, le Canada doit être et sera un partenaire fiable et engagé dans la région. Canada is here as your partner, and we are ready to work with you to build a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific for all of our peoples. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Madame la Ministre, pour votre discours et pour avoir expliqué si clairement que votre politique de défense est là pour renforcer les règles de la région et les règles internationales, je suis aussi sûr. I picked up one particular thing in your address, which was an emphasis I hadn't heard before from a Canadian Defence Minister on the diversity of your relationships in the region, because you spoke about East Asia, you spoke about Southeast Asia, including your 2 new bilateral accords, and you also spoke about the Indian Ocean. So that is quite a vast geographical region to which you are projecting influence and defense diplomatic skills. We now turn to questions. I've got about 9 or 10 people on the list. What I intend to do this time is ask 5 or 6 of you to sequentially ask your questions, and then I'll come back to the panelists and invite them to answer in rough proportion to the number of questions that might have been directed principally to them. If I can get more than 5 or 6 in, I will, and then close the panel with their reflections. But could I please ask from France, Valérie Niquet?
Thank you. It's a question to Secretary Carlito Galvez. You mentioned free and open Indo-Pacific and the rule of law, and this is something that Japan shares too. And how do you see the role of Japan in the region, considering the many constraints that Tokyo still faces in military action, including the exports of arms to its partners or close allies? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from Germany, but also the IISS, Ben Schrier.
Thank you, John. Also 2 short questions for Secretary Galvez, if I may. Secretary, you mentioned that your president has instructed you to, quote, safeguard every inch of Philippine territory. So 2 questions there. First, does that mean that the Philippines is moving from a hedging strategy between the US and China towards a more close alignment with the United States as part of a balancing strategy against China? And secondly, how can the Philippine Armed Forces accelerate the necessary development of more air and maritime capability, including unlocking more funding? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from Japan, but also from the IISS, Yuka Koshino.
Thank you, John. I have a question to Defense Secretary Wallace, since you touched on Japan. So NATO-Japan engagement has been gaining momentum since Prime Minister Kishida's attendance at the Madrid summit last year. And we've also seen reportings that NATO plans to open an office in its first Asia office in Japan. The Hiroshima Accord signed during Sunak's visit to Japan last month also stated that the 2 countries will cooperate to deepen NATO-Japan cooperation. So from your perspective, where are the key areas that Japan can make a substantial contribution to supporting NATO's mission in Indo-Pacific and beyond? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from China, Yongsheng Teng.
感谢有发言的机会。我想
Thank you very much for this opportunity, allowing me to raise my question. I just want to make a short comment regarding Madam Anita Anand's speech. So after the Cold War, in Asia-Pacific region, basically stability has been maintained. It is a result of combined efforts of all the countries in the region. So that's why we're here discussing the stability and the balance in this region. Just now, Madam Anita Anand said that China is a destructive force in the region. As a matter of fact, what we're doing is, to the contrary to this, we have been making great efforts to maintain peace and stability in the region. Most countries in the region have already become Or, to put it in another way, China has become the biggest trading partner to most countries in the region, and in terms of security, we have also made great progress, be it from a bilateral relationship point of view or multilateral relationship point of view. So, Madam Minister, you said that China is a destructive force. Actually, what you said is destructive by itself. China's force has never been extending to anywhere near Canada for any operation. We are not monitoring or supervising any national leaders' speech or dialogue. In order to maintain the stability and the balance in the region, it is true that we need to explore more effective measures instead of base your speech on assumed orders to criticize others. Thank you very much.
Translation, therefore, Minister Anand, I heard the word in English destructive. I think it might have been disruptive, the word that might have been used by the minister, so that might help to sort of lower the level of anxieties in the room and allow for the dialogue to continue on that basis. Could I invite from Singapore, Ravi Valoor?
Yeah. Thank you, John. This is to Secretary Galvez from the Philippines. So earlier this morning, we heard Secretary Austin say that he's going to sit down with you and the defense ministers of Japan and Australia. Now, where do you see these discussions leading to? And given that you're meeting 3 of the Quad defense ministers, and you bought cruise missiles from the 4th that is missing in this room today, what is your attitude to Quad? And would you be open to a closer working relationship with Quad? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from the United States, Eldridge Colby.
Thank you, John. This is a question for Minister Anand. I was impressed by the ambition and scope of your agenda and aims in the Indo-Pacific. Given Canada's commitment and strong rhetoric about the Ukraine conflict and European security as well, do you commit to spending your NATO obligation of 2% per year?
Thank you very much. No Minister of National Defense ever is allowed to escape that question. Bill Emmett from the United Kingdom and Chair of the Board of Trustees of the ISS.
Thank you, John. It was striking. This excellent panel in their presentations talked about such a wide range, not just of geography, but also of topics as under the heading of stability and balance in the Asia-Pacific. So therefore, I feel I'm not at risk of lowering the tone by mentioning economics, and in particular, economic security. Last week in Japan, Deputy Prime Minister Lawrence Wong gave a very striking lecture warning of the risks that the de-risking strategies of economic security may be going too far and potentially leading to a fragmented economic system as well as political system in the region. I wonder if the panel could comment on where do they feel that their country's economic security policies are, as it were, running up against or having contradictions with their diplomacy and their broader economic and foreign affairs positions.
And could I now proceed to your neighbor, Bastian Giegerich from Germany, but also the IISS.
John, thank you very much. I'll take it back to defense, I'm afraid. My question is for Secretary Wallace. So Secretary, you said that UK interests lie as much here in this region as they do in Europe, and I wonder whether you could say a bit how that insight translates into choices in the Defense Command Paper that we will see soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'll take perhaps one more from the Executive Director of ISS Asia, who's done so much to make this dialogue a success already, James Crabtree.
Thank you very much, John. This is a question for Minister Anand. Could you
tell us a little bit more about Canada's minilateral engagement strategy in this region? So you outlined some details of the Indo-Pacific strategy of July last year, but Canada is not presently part of some of the new family of minilateral organizations. Recently you made some comments about a potential ambition to join the non-nuclear components of the AUKUS agreement in the technological domain, or at least to participate in that. Given you're sitting next to Secretary Wallace, perhaps you could come up with a small agreement to participate, or tell us if you'd like to.
Thank you very much. What I think I'll do now is return to the panel in the reverse order in which they initially spoke, giving them each a couple of minutes to address the questions principally directed to them. I will have time, I think, for a second round. I've got 5 or 6 people here, and we'll be able to return to you. So that's excellent. For Minister Anand, there was disruption, there was defense spend, there was minilateralism.
Well, thank you so much for the questions. Excellent questions as usual. Let me start with Chinese, the questions regarding China. I want to be clear that Canada believes that we need to coexist with partners and allies and all countries. But at the same time, we must call a spade, and we have seen increased militarization by China in the South China Sea, including in the region surrounding Taiwan. And that is concerning, and it is really indicative of the need for an approach to be eyes wide open on China, to cooperate with China where we must, but also to challenge China where its conduct is increasing instability and disruption in the Indo-Pacific region. And therefore, in response to the question as to what conduct in particular I am referring to recent conduct by Chinese aircraft and intercepts regarding our Royal Canadian Air Force members who are simply monitoring UN sanctions under Operation Neon in accordance with international law in international airspace. And by and large, those interceptions have been undertaken in a safe and professional manner. But there have been some that have been deemed to be unsafe. We are always going to stand up for the safety of our air crews, and we are addressing this appropriately. And so that is just one example. And as I said, Canada will continue to ensure that we are working on open lines of communication and recognizing the need to coexist responsibly. But when it comes to the safety of our air crew, we must address the issue that is presented, and that includes the one that I outlined. Now, I will move to discuss the 2% question that arose. First and foremost, Canada is a founding member of NATO. We have continuously stepped up in many tangible ways to indicate our undying commitment to this multilateral organization. And one example is our presence on NATO's eastern flank, where we have led the Enhanced Forward Presence Battle Group in Latvia for over 5 years, the most diverse battle group on NATO's eastern flank, consisting of 11 countries. We are currently moving to brigade level, committing more and more resources, and ensuring we are doing our part in a tangible way. So there are many ways to measure commitments to an organization. That is one. But on the question of the 2% itself, our defense spending is on an upward trajectory. It is increasing by 70% in the 9-year period beginning in 2017. In addition, we committed $8 billion in budget 2022 to defense spending, and almost $40 billion to NORAD modernization and continental defense in June 2022. So our defense spending is on an upward trajectory, and we will continue to ensure that we are making meaningful contributions to NATO and to all of our multilateral alliances. And then finally, the question that came to me related to, what was it, John?
Well, there's a question about
AUKUS. Yeah, I think it was on AUKUS. So, as I have continually said, our relationships with our Five Eyes allies are strong. And indeed, I'm sitting beside my good friend Ben Wallace, which is indicative of our continued and ongoing conversations and discussions and collaboration on all matters relating to peace and security. In terms of AUKUS itself, Canada has deep strengths in the areas of quantum, AI, and technological capabilities writ large. And we will continue to collaborate with all of our allies on bilateral and multilateral bases so that we can continue to contribute in meaningful ways as we have been doing.
Thank you very much. Ben Wallace on Japan, UK tilt to the Indo-Pacific, perhaps a bit of de-risking as well.
Yeah, well, look, we could be mistaken if we thought it was just about the Pacific and China and no mention of Russia here. I mean, Russia has a Pacific interest. It has, and if you're in Japan, obviously you're very aware of Russia's behavior, sometimes towards Japan, but certainly in that part of the Pacific. And so, of course, NATO having an office here is in its interest of NATO, and also the importance of sharing lessons both from Ukraine, but also across the sort of NATO disposition in Europe into this part of the world. Japan, an open, liberal democracy with our shared values, trading, important trading partner with us, important technological partner with Europe and the United Kingdom, and therefore having a NATO office there is important for a number of issues. You know, let's not forget, Russia has been quite aggressive in this region and will continue to be so. The Ukrainian war has significantly damaged Russia's land army, but it still maintains a fleet, naval, quite a large naval fleet in the Northern Fleet and indeed Black Sea and indeed over in sort of Vladivostok and around this side of the Pacific. And we see evidence already of Japan moving some of its capabilities to this part of the region that poses a threat to all of us. The Russians have the RERP program, that is the program designed to look at, disrupt or damage potentially undersea cables, undersea energy. All of those capabilities are coming into the Pacific. And we should realize what that means for our vulnerabilities. And we are all vulnerable to global cable threats, whether that is from espionage or indeed just disruption or energy. Energy sort of warfare is growing, sadly. You know, we neighbor with Norway. Norway now supplies 40% of Europe's gas. Right? It's not just Norway's obligation to protect that. It is all European countries have a duty to protect that vulnerability. And that won't be any different here in the Pacific for some of our dependency on cables. So Singapore, for example, its finance sector, protecting its critical national infrastructure, really important. One of the world leaders in disrupting that critical infrastructure, who not only has the capability, but has the intent and does attack critical national infrastructure, as we're seeing in Ukraine, against all international law, against the Geneva Conventions, is Russia. So I think it's important NATO is in Japan to do a number of things. One is to share the knowledge of the threat. And remember, the High North is a place where both Russia and China has an interest of different trade routes. And therefore, you know, for all of us, again, in Europe, that is a direct connection to this part of the world. But also, obviously, the common standards of NATO equipment. We would say, as NATO members, NATO equipment is some of the best in the world. And if you are a member here who spent a lot of money on Russian equipment, I'd be taking it back to the shop. Given what I've seen happen in Ukraine, I would be encouraging you not to waste your money on Russian equipment. It doesn't seem to work very well. And I would secondly say that that common standard that has been often used at the base of Australia and New Zealand and others in their equipment program is a good and open standard that allows interoperability and integration. On the other areas about the EU, the balance between Europe and the Pacific tilt to the United Kingdom. So first of all, it's not an either-or, right? Let's balance this. The British defence budget will top out over £50 billion this year or next. We'll be heading towards 2.3% of GDP and then getting up towards 2.5% as a pledge. That does give us some headroom after some of our NATO obligations. And I think that allows the UK to play to its strengths in this region. One of our strengths is knowledge, the knowledge of our men and women of our armed forces, training, capacity building with our friends and allies in the region, wherever that may be. We obviously have a garrison in Brunei, for example, and that is an important capability in effectively improving deterrence and indeed capacity of our friends and allies in the region, but also deployments of our naval assets and being able to convene our partners and friends from Europe who also have interests here. When we came with our carrier group last year, I was delighted all the way through that deployment. We were accompanied by a Dutch frigate, the Netherlands, and in Europe, countries like Portugal and the Netherlands, in our DNA is freedom of navigation in our trade, it's in our history, it's in our essentially our economic model, and so it's inevitable that when we come to the Pacific together, we will come with our friends throughout the next few years. And that's an important thing, not only for the United Kingdom, the flag of the United Kingdom, but the flag of Europe, the flag of partners from that side of the world. So I don't think it's an either-or, and as long as we can fulfill our commitments to NATO, which is important, then we also have to, I think, contribute as a P5 nation to underpinning our obligation as a P5 to uphold those rules and law. And finally, on economic resilience, the question there, absolutely right. Britain doesn't think the solution to economic vulnerability or sovereignty is to pull up the drawbridge. We believe it's diversify your supply chain, have choices. So if one avenue closes off, you can work with somebody else in order to achieve what you need for your equipment or your capabilities. And not only by doing that, not only do you manage to protect yourselves, but you also collaborate and strengthen partnerships. AUKUS is a collaboration, but we actually collaborate with many countries in this room, in cyber, in other capacities. And that collaboration is really key to security and defense partnerships. That's how you build alliances. And so pulling up the drawbridge will not help anyone, in my view, protect themselves unless they are a huge economy. There's very few economies on earth that can effectively pull up the drawbridge and do everything from scratch. And even when those economies try, you often find they have to rely on external technology, either acquired, bought, or in some cases, stolen.
Thank you very much. Just before I turn to the Philippines, I want to be a sort of equal opportunities interrogator. I asked your colleague from Netherlands last year this question, so I'm going to ask you the very same question. In 2021, the United Kingdom and the Netherlands jointly did a freedom of navigation patrol in the Black Sea. It was in order to assert the importance of keeping a free and open Black Sea. And some people in this region might question whether Westerners are truly committed to a free and open Indo-Pacific when there's been such difficulty ensuring a free and open Black Sea. We're now relying on an agreement that is permanently tentative between the United Nations, Turkey, Ukraine, and Russia that permits a percentage of fertilizers and food coming out of the Black Sea. The biggest importer of Ukrainian wheat in the world was Egypt. The number 2 is Indonesia, G20 power. Given the poverty and the quality of Russian equipment, should we not take a little bit of a risk and look to see ways in which we do a freedom of navigation patrol in the Black Sea in order to assist the food security of this part of the world?
Well, I think unlike the Pacific, the Black Sea is governed obviously by the Montreux Declaration, which limits, not only even when it's allowing people to come in, it limits the number of foreign warships in the Black Sea at any one time. So, it is in a sense a controlled sea, unlike obviously the openness and freedom of the Pacific.
A reflagging operation wouldn't be possible for a coastal state of Romania?
Look, I mean, it's the actual Black Sea nations have a freedom to do what they like. We've noticed for many years Russia has abused exercise boxes. They've declared vast swathes of ocean no-go by just declaring it's a live firing area. Even when they don't do any live firing, they have intimidated Georgia and any other who seeks to think it's not just a Russian sea. Look, there's a plus side at the moment in the Montreux Declaration being upheld by Turkey. Russia can't resupply its fleet. Russia is currently using its fleet in the Black Sea to obliterate civilian areas of Ukraine. I mean, when you fire these missiles are being fired, they're fired from kilo submarines, for example, aimed at everything from, human populations and critical infrastructure. And if Turkey were to allow it to be open, then the first thing you would see is a significant naval reinforcement from other parts of the Russian fleet, and that isn't in Ukraine's interest or ours. But you make an interesting point about grain, right? There is efforts by Russia in places like Africa to blame high food prices and everything else on everyone from, Britain, I think we were described as the eternal enemy the other day, the West, everybody else, that's their fault. It's our fault that the grain prices are in Africa. The reason grain prices are high is because Russia illegally invaded Ukraine. End of story. No other reason, wouldn't have happened, they've caused it.
Philippines, you had a couple of questions on Japan and your tilt towards the United States and how that balances with your approach also to China.
Yes, Japan is a very important ally. All alliance that we had is very important, especially Japan. Japan helped us in three aspects. One is the peace process in Mindanao. They rehabilitated most of the battle-ridden areas in Mindanao, especially during the Battle of Marawi. They donated $200 million for the rehabilitation. Second is also for the modernization of our Coast Guard. They provided multi-role vessels, and also for the armed forces, they donated 5 billion spare parts of our helicopters. Japan is very important also in our Build program because they provided a lot of funds. During our visit in Japan this year, the Prime Minister, the Japan government, assured the Philippines of its support to achieve the high medium level income country, and provided much support of 600 billion yen, and also the construction of the first subway in Metro Manila. So Japan, we are looking forward for having some sort of reciprocal access agreement, and also we are jointly having some meetings with the security and the defense department on how we could have include the Australia and US in our talk. And we are in the Philippines has only two missing forces agreement with Australia and also with the US. So Australia provided us a very intensive training for counterterrorism. So they provided people-to-people skill training to our soldiers. And also Australia provided meaningful strategic education. I came from an Australian education. I learned the Australian why. So with that, and I think that's what we are looking at the support of the different countries, like mandate countries, in achieving prosperous Indo-Pacific. We are the Philippines also with that.
Thank you very much. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to take 3 questions to ensure 3 different regions of the Indo-Pacific are included, and then give each of our panelists 1 minute to send their final messages to this gathering. So first from Indonesia, Fitriani, please.
Thank you. My question is, I would like to know, aside from the Minister Anand that mentioned the achievement on women, peace and security, I would like to know the commitment of the countries in terms of supporting the advancement of women, peace and security agenda, not only in quantity, but in quality, including increasing access in terms of leadership and command position for women in the armed forces, peacekeeping, as well as leadership in new technology, such as cyber and artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from the Republic of Korea, Bo Ram-kom.
Thank you. I have another unilateral question for our Canadian Defense Minister. In March, Canada offered to lead a new Quad, including Korea, Japan, and the US. I'm wondering if that has gained any traction, and what would the agenda be? Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think I can actually squeeze in 2 more. So Gregory Poling from the United States.
Thank you very much. My question is for Secretary Galvez. We've heard quite a bit about collaboration with the United States, Japan, and Australia to enhance deterrence and interoperability. But I wonder if you could speak to what kind of role the Philippines would like to see the US, Japan, and Australia play in peacetime to help push back on the gray zone coercion that your forces face day in and day out.
So that's on the gray zone and how you can cooperate in peace. I'll take one more and then come to the panel in the order that they originally spoke in. So Philippines, UK, Canada. Robert Ward.
Thank you, John. A question for Secretary Wallace. The Hiroshima Accord is a welcome statement of intent for continued deepening of UK-Japan relations. The Accord notes the UK's role in upholding the strategic values of the CPTPP after its accession to the bloc. Given the important geopolitical element to the CPTPP, what do you think the priorities for the UK should be in upholding these values?
Thank you very much. So, first the Philippines, US, Australia was an important point, then the UK, and we'll close with Anita Anand from Canada. You, sir.
Yeah. During our meeting with Secretary Blinken and also Secretary Austin, we really see the security alliance that we have to expand it to a more expanded alliance, which include economic. That's why during our meeting we pushed for some economic packages so that we can be free from certain economic coercion in the future. And Japan and US are very helpful on this. So that's why President Biden has promised that he will send his economic team to the Philippines. And we have seen already the presence of US aid providing some assistance, especially during disasters. And I really agree that our future fostering is really to have a close relation with Australia, Japan, Canada, the UK, and the other countries, so that we can really look forward in accelerating the modernization of our armed forces, and also to push for the rule of law based in the Indo-Pacific region.
Thank you very much. Just before I move to Ben Wallace, you mentioned the visiting forces agreements that you have with the United States and Australia. There's been a lot of talk of a potential visiting forces agreement between Philippines and Japan that would work within the constitutions of each country. Can you announce any progress on that kind of discussion?
We are on the process of discussions. Okay. And actually in the Balikatan exercises, we really explore on possibly expanding the bilateral Balikatan exercises into a multilateral exercises. So in that exercise, we already included, for the first time, 101 Australian soldiers. And in the near future, we might be expanding it with the other allied nations.
Thank you very much. Ben Wallace.
Well, thank you. Obviously, I'm the Defence Secretary rather than the Trade Secretary, but I think CPTT is really important because the principles we have to uphold is, as I sort of said in my speech, that the acceptance of a common standard of the rule of law, of freedom, openness and transparency, as Defence Secretary Austin said. You know, it's important that we engage in our trade in a transparent way, but also that the United Kingdom, I think one of the most important things is be openness to competition, be openness to free trade. That's what it's about. You know, you don't have to tell me in this region the success that free trade has given many of these countries over the last 30 years. If you look at the progress and growth of GDP, that is driven out of effectively free trade and openness, and that has benefited millions, potentially billions of people in this region, and I think that is the real success of it. There's no half signing up, is how I would say. You're either in it or you're not, and we're in it, and we will do everything we can to make sure we live up to the spirit of that.
Anita Anand.
Well, thank you. Two questions came to me there. The first on women, peace, and security. And let me just say that we all have an obligation to advance progressive values, including ensuring equality and non-discrimination of women in whatever institution we're participating in. And for the other women defense ministers in the room from the Netherlands and Portugal, and myself and other women around the NATO table and beyond, that is something we are working on every day internally in our own military institutions, but also externally in our partnerships and our cooperative arrangements with other countries. And certainly in our Indo-Pacific strategy, the externally focused document that I discussed in my speech, Women, Peace and Security, ensuring that we are imparting and discussing and ensuring collaboration on these important progressive and, I would say, values that ensure modernization of military institutions are absolutely central. But it's not just external, it's also internal. What are we doing in our own military institutions, in our own armed forces to ensure that women have those leadership roles, they're able to ascend to those leadership roles, and they're doing so in a way that is not beset with sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, or discrimination of any sort. And in Canada's case, we are taking a very deliberate and explicit approach to ensuring that women are able to advance in a way that respects their dignity, empowers them, and protects them every single day when they are putting on a uniform in service of our country. And I'm happy to provide more detail offline about those many reforms and initiatives that we are continuing to implement. In terms of leading a new Quad, I just want to reiterate the point that Canada will always stand up and contribute to our alliances, to our partners, to our allies. One of the messages that I am trying to drive home here today is that in this region in particular, you will see more of Canada, whether it's in terms of the bilateral or multilateral partnerships and alliances, whether it is in terms of a third frigate, whether it's in terms of military cooperation and exercises with our partners. The goal is to ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific that is stable, as the name of this panel suggests. We all have a role to play in ensuring stability, and Canada will be here to ensure that we are playing our part to build a free and open Pacific as a Pacific country ourselves. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Let me again invite the audience to do two things. First, we're going to finish this session exactly 2 minutes early at 10:58, so I would hope that all of you return 2 minutes early at 11:28 to ensure that the ministerial lunch will be able to begin smartly at 1300 hours, and we have a really excellent third plenary to look forward to. And then secondly, as the clock strikes 10:58, could you please enthusiastically thank our three speakers for their presentation.
A Russian man claiming to hold top-level secrets about Russian advanced bombers has just turned up at the U.S. southern border, seeking asylum. The man claims to have been an engineer at a production facility over in the city of Kazan, and he says that he possesses top-secret information about the White Swan Tu-160, which is the most advanced bomber in the Russian arsenal. U.S. border officials, they interviewed the man, and they determined that his story was in fact credible and eventually passed him off to the FBI, who are still in the process of interrogating him right now. However, analysts have pointed out that the fact that the story was even leaked to the public is an indication that perhaps the American government is encouraging other Russians who also hold top-level secrets to also escape to America. And if you thought that was interesting, well then you should click on that button below this video and check out Epic TV, one of the best no-censorship video platforms on the internet.